Hello everyone, and welcome to our video for the Implementing ROMA at the local community action agency level, an introduction with a focus on using the performance management framework. This is part of an ongoing curriculum that the Community Action Partnership and the Association for Nationally Certified ROMA Trainers has been developing for its ROMA trainers and implementers, meant for them to use at their agency conducting trainings. I am joined on the video by Courtney Kohler, a Senior Associate here at the Partnership, and Barbara Mooney, the Executive Director of ANCRT. So to start off with the big picture, we really want to stress that ROMA is embedded within the broader CSBG performance management framework, and that includes the local organizational standards, state and federal accountability measures, results-oriented management and accountability, the CSBG state plan, the CSBG annual report, and the ACSI survey. And ROMA is actually integrated through all of these different components of the broader CSBG management framework. We don't want you to think that ROMA is just a standalone or an independent piece. There are elements of the ROMA framework embedded through all of these pieces that collectively comprise the broader CSBG performance management framework. And so, again, that's why it's so important for local agencies to be reviewing how they're implementing ROMA, because it touches on so many things related to performance management with community action agencies. So what this slide shows is the connection between a couple of those elements focused on the organizational standards and the ROMA cycle. So you see on the left-hand side of your screen a number of elements of the organizational standard focused on things like consumer input and involvement, community engagement, board governance, human resource management, and financial operations and oversight. And you see on the far right-hand side the ROMA cycle's emphasis on implementation of services and strategies. And then you see in the middle where there is significant overlap between ROMA and the organizational standards in such planning processes as the community assessment, strategic planning, reporting across a wide variety of both programmatic and fiscal indicators, data and analysis, and organizational leadership. So again, ROMA is threaded throughout almost all of the organizational standards. And also the organizational standards help make sure that agencies are on track with fully implementing and using ROMA from the program to the agency level. And just to call out one particular standard that I really think brings this home, Standard 4.3, that asks that the organization's community action plan and strategic plan document the continuous use of the full results-oriented management and accountability, or ROMA cycle, or comparable system. And in addition, that the organization documents having used the services of a ROMA certified trainer or equivalent to assist in implementation. So again, this standard is included in the overall organizational standards to make sure that ROMA has been fully integrated into those crucially important planning processes that agencies use to guide their overall management and operations. And I think it underscores the importance of making sure that all community action agencies have looked at how they've integrated ROMA from the level of their individual programs all the way up to the leadership team, the board level, and across the agency as a whole. So ROMA really needs to be focused on a variety of different levels within your organization, and this toolkit and curriculum is meant to help agencies assess themselves and make sure that they are fully implementing ROMA across all those levels.
And so the Implementing ROMA curriculum walks through each of these pieces of the ROMA cycle, and then you can see here what is included in each of those. So as we talk about assessment and how to implement that within the organization, we're talking about the assessment of current ROMA implementation and really the use of the performance management framework that Jarl mentioned, as well as assessment of the organization's culture. Then we talk about planning. How do we actually start to plan based on the assessment that we've made of the organization and where they're at currently? Then we put that plan into action and actually implement that. Then we report using a scorecard. So we want to know how much change that we have been able to have through the plan that we've put into place, and use this agency-wide scorecard type process. And then we want to make sure we always look back at reassessment. So we want to look back at our previous cycle and learn from it. We want to know what changed, what moved forward, what maybe didn't change, and then what was really behind the outcomes that we did achieve. And then that way we can apply those lessons as we go through the ROMA cycle again. So the first part of this, as I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, is really about determining where you are now. And so that's how you start this implementing ROMA process. So it starts with this piece of assessment. And if you don't know where you've started, we can't really identify what has actually changed. And if we can't identify the change, then we're not able to really acknowledge the success that we've had or how much success we've had. So implementing ROMA introduces this concept of a ROMA audit, and it uses a checklist process, and it helps to identify what you are doing now that would help demonstrate each of the items on the checklist, and then what could be done differently to include the ROMA element. And so finding out this current status, this is how we actually determine what our needs are. Then we can identify what we want to see change, and from there make that plan. So very similar to doing the ROMA process with your community needs assessment and strategic planning, but doing it more at the organizational level and how we really implement ROMA agency-wide. So this is a screenshot of part of the checklist. You can see here, and this kind of goes through the last part of the ROMA cycle. And so each piece of the ROMA cycle is pulled out, and then there's ROMA actions in that second column that kind of challenge the agency to think about, are you currently doing this? Are you not? And then how are you doing it? So it goes through this list of questions for each phase of the ROMA cycle, wanting the agency to consider with those ROMA actions, who is involved and what do they do? What is the expected to be achieved in that phase? How will you know if it's done well or if it's successful? How do you collect, aggregate, and analyze the data? And then what makes that process useful? So this is part of that assessment piece as we start this implementation of ROMA. I'll turn it over to Barbara Mooney, and she's going to talk a little bit about this organizational culture and organizational change.
Thanks, Gerald and Courtney. The assessment process has to include an understanding of your organizational culture. The ROMA implementation is embedded in the actions of your culture. And one of the things that we hear a lot is when we're trying to make a change that we find it difficult. And that's not uncommon because what the research shows us is that no matter what change or no matter what kind of an organization there is out there, the one constant that really helps you know if you're going to be able to make that change or not is the importance of organizational culture. So part of the assessment that we're asking you to do is to look at your own organizational culture. So we have a handout that you can use to help you look at some things about your culture that will help you really find out what's happening before you start to try to make a plan to change. Then once you see what's happening and what's not happening, you'll be able to identify something that you could change. And the identification of that change leads you to the planning process. And we've come up with this idea of a pathways plan to impact your agency's movement towards ROMA. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that plan might look like. there are really two parts of this plan. And the first is about the piece that I just talked about, the organizational culture. We need to scale up our ROMA activities so that organizations become more results-oriented and embrace a local theory of change and really connect with the national theory of change. And we need to scale out so that we're spreading the knowledge and the principles from peers to peers so that we have this common understanding of what ROMA is about. And then we're asking that you identify one issue to address first. Think about one thing that you could potentially change that would have an impact on the implementation of ROMA. And then look at what the current process is, identify the current steps, and think about what needs to change. We have some ideas about the kinds of things that might be instrumental in your change process, knowledge and the people that could help you and the resources. Just generally thinking about what do you need to make a change, and then set out some action steps. And this is one very quick work plan template. We'll have a couple others in the workshop material to help you think about what steps you would take, who would be responsible, and what resources that you'd need. And then what's our next step, Jarl?
The next step is putting your plan into action, and we want to stress that all of the ROMA curricula that we've developed as part of this series are meant to be action-focused, so after the trainer or implementer conducts the training, there are additional steps. So for example, if you use the developing an agency-level theory of change, of course the next step is to build on the training by actually developing your agency-level theory of change. And implementing ROMA at the agency level is no different, but we really want to stress the importance of these follow-up steps. Once you have done the training and worked with the materials, it's important then to take action, because almost every agency is going to find that there are places where additional actions are necessary to continue implementing ROMA, again, at all levels of the agency. So after you have used the materials in the curriculum, it's important to, first off, establish a time frame for action steps. So this is more than just a one-off training. You're going to want to use these materials as part of a broader agency change process, looking at fully implementing ROMA. So the first step is obviously figuring out how long you need to implement the follow-up steps. Then secondly, you need to identify all the people who you plan to get involved in the action steps. So since this is intended for use by the agency as a whole, you're probably going to want to look very broadly at which staff you are going to need to do the follow-up work that you identify as you go through the material. Third, make sure that your actions fit into the agency's mission and local theory of change, and of course your strategic plan. So you want to make sure that the next steps, the follow-up you do, is fully aligned with broader agency planning processes. And then finally, you want to make sure that you take action. Make sure that you follow through on the next steps that you've identified.
All right, and then after you've taken action, you need to know what actually happened. So that's when we observe and measure those results. And so the first part of this is really making sure that we have clear indicators. And so through your Impact Pathways plan, you're going to include steps as well as the time frame, but you also want to include indicators of success. So really thinking through what is success to the organization. How will you know that you're making progress? And then what do you expect to see change that you can actually measure? And so one way that you can do this is through a scorecard to follow the progress. And so what we've done is we've taken this ROMA checklist that you begin in the audit process, and we simply make it into a scorecard. And so you can see how the columns are added over on the right-hand side. to color code the progress, whether you're currently in process, you've achieved something there, or if you haven't begun yet with the red. And so this is one way to do this. Of course, scorecards are kind of being used across the agency, and we encourage those for agency-wide measuring of progress as well. So Barbara, what are some closing thoughts that we should consider with this curriculum?
Okay, I think that we just need a few things to identify that we need before we get started. So coming back to the beginning, looking at the assessment again, what are the next steps? We need a leadership team that has a results orientation and demonstrates this commitment. We have to have resources available for this part of the performance management framework, and we need to have communication across the agency with all the staff, not just community service block grant staff, but with the entire agency, so that we understand the benefits and how the processes of the ROMA cycle will support the agency.
So it'll be accessible on the partnership website. You can find it in our ROMA Next Generation resource guide. You can also just search ROMA in our resource library. But it is part of this full series. So you see the bubbles on your screen. Part of these components that all kind of wrap into implementing ROMA contain things like creating your local theory of change, setting the stage for data collection, also analysis and using your data, and then understanding community level work. And so all of these components kind of fit together within this training series, with implementing ROMA being that culmination piece of the curriculum. You can also access implementing ROMA through our Community Action Academy. So we have on-demand eCourses that are available to the full network. It's free to create an account. You go to moodle.communityactionpartnership.com. After you create and confirm your account, you can go through the ROMA training category, and you'll see ROMA Next Generation Training Series. And that's how you get to the 4 courses that you see here on your screen, with implementing ROMA being the one we talked about today as the new course. And of course, we always encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions about how to use this curriculum, the different components. We also love hearing back from people on what you've done as a result of learning about implementing ROMA. So feel free to reach out to us anytime here at the partnership or with ANCRT. And we thank you for joining in and listening to this recording.